You made yourself harmless so early that you no longer remember choosing it. The world called it kindness. Jung called it something else. He mapped a mechanism in the psyche where the person who cannot hurt anyone quietly becomes the person who cannot fully exist. You have felt this. You sit in a room full of people who praise your patience, and something in you knows that what you are offering them is not kindness. It is disappearance. Society does not have a word for this cost. It has 100 words for cruelty, for aggression, for the damage caused by people who take too much space. But it has no language for the person who was damaged by taking none. No diagnosis for the one who vanished inside their own accommodation. No framework for the specific agonizing grief of realizing that the version of you the world loved most was the version that required the least of you to actually be present. By the end of this video, you will understand the precise contract you signed under duress when you were a child. You will recognize that your inability to disappoint people is not a sign of your immense love. It is an evolutionary survival strategy that has drastically outlived its usefulness. And you will see the exact devastating price your psyche paid for making yourself safe for everyone else. You did not learn this behavior in a self-help book. You learned it before you could read. You learned to read the atmospheric pressure of the house the way other children learn to ride bicycles. You could feel the shift in a room when a parent's mood turned. You knew which version of yourself kept the adults calm, which silences were safe, which words would detonate something you did not have the power to survive. And you adapted, precisely, brilliantly, without anyone teaching you how. What you built has a name, and the name tells you something critical about what it was costing you. Jung called it the persona. He understood that the persona is not a free choice. It is an assembled compromise between the individual and society. A certain kind of behavior is forced on them by the world, and the danger, Jung warned, is that they become identical with their personas. The mask eats the face. Your harmlessness was not weakness. It was profound intelligence. The child read the environment with devastating accuracy and constructed exactly the self that the system would tolerate. You did not fail to develop boundaries. You correctly identified that boundaries would get you punished, abandoned, or both. So you built something else instead, a version of yourself so predictable, so accommodating, so entirely without friction that the people around you never had to confront their own volatility. And you did this at an age when other children were learning to spell their own names, already fluent in the language of other people's needs, already an expert in the silent curriculum of what was allowed and what would be punished. The world offered you approval in exchange for absolute predictability. You signed a survival contract before you were old enough to read its terms. And that contract is still running. You walk into a dinner party, and within 30 seconds, you have mapped every emotional need in the room. You know who needs to be heard, who needs to be carefully managed, who is one careless comment away from an eruption that everyone else will pretend did not happen. Before the first drink is poured, you have already calculated what version of yourself this room requires, and you have become it, not consciously, the way your lungs breathe. The operating system that saved the child now runs the adult, and it was never updated because it was never recognized as software. You thought it was you. That is the trap. When the contract becomes the identity, questioning it does not feel like growth. It feels like death. You know this because you have tried. You have tried to be less accommodating, less available, less automatically attuned to what everyone else needs. And the moment you tried, you felt a terror so disproportionate to the situation that it confused you. You were not in danger. You were at brunch. But your nervous system responded as though you had just violated the single condition that kept you alive. Because in the original terms of the contract, you had. But the way your body enforces this contract today is what makes breaking it feel so physically dangerous. You decide to say no. Not a dramatic refusal, a small one. A quiet declining of something you have accommodated 100 times before. And before the word is fully formed in your mouth, Your body detonates. Your chest constricts. A cold nausea drops into the center of your stomach. Your jaw locks. Your hands go cold. You have spent your entire life believing that this physical sickness was your conscience telling you to stop, that the nausea meant you were doing something wrong, that the guilt was evidence of your deep moral sensitivity, proof that you cared more than other people, felt more than other people, that your goodness ran so deep it had become somatic. It was not your conscience, it was a control system. There is a distinction buried in analytical psychology that most modern frameworks have collapsed into a single useless category: the moral conscience and the ethical conscience. The moral conscience is a function of the collective. It is the internalized voice of every expectation your family, your culture, and your social environment installed in you before you had the capacity to question it. The moral conscience whispers, "This action will disappoint someone, stop." The ethical conscience is something entirely different. It is, as Jung wrote, a manifestation of the self, an inner voice that often demands things that are unacceptable to the collective. The ethical conscience whispers something far more rare. This action causes genuine harm. Stop. They feel identical from the inside. That is the entire problem. You have been obeying the first voice your entire life and calling it morality. Every time you swallowed a refusal, every time your body punished you for considering a boundary, every time guilt flooded your nervous system before you had even finished deciding whether you had done anything wrong, you were not experiencing conscience. You were experiencing compliance. Your guilt is not proof of your morality. It is a weaponized enforcement mechanism installed by the collective to keep you in the contract. The people who learned to activate your guilt did not need to be consciously manipulative to do it. They simply intuited, the way all social animals intuit, that your guilt response was reliable, that it could be triggered with a sigh, a silence, a shift in facial expression, the withdrawal of warmth, and you responded to every activation the same way. You abandoned your own position before you had finished defending it. The mechanism was built to override your will, and it has never stopped running. It was built when you were small enough that the difference between disappointing someone and being abandoned was functionally zero, and your nervous system still operates under those original terms, regardless of how much your intellect has evolved past them. And here is what makes this program so devastating. You already know all of this. You have read the books. You know the word codependency. You can trace the pattern back to its origin in your childhood. You can explain, clearly and articulately, exactly why you over-accommodate. You have the insight. You have the vocabulary. And the guilt fires anyway. Because insight does not disarm a somatic program. Knowing why you flinch does not stop the flinch. You can sit in a therapist's office and describe with perfect clarity the family system that built this reflex. And that same evening, when your partner sighs because you suggested a different restaurant, your chest will tighten and you will change your answer before you have finished the sentence. The guilt fires faster than thought. It lands in the body before the mind has had time to evaluate whether any actual harm was done. And by the time your intellect catches up, you have already apologized, already reversed your position, already smoothed the disruption you did not cause. If you are recognizing yourself in this, if the guilt has been firing your entire life and you have only just begun to suspect it was never your conscience, the alchemist's path was written for exactly this phase. It gives you Jung-based perception training, somatic drills for distinguishing the superego from the authentic voice of the self, and 3 exclusive chapter videos that go deeper than anything on this channel. 236 pages. Downloadable now at thesurrealmind.com. The terrifying reality of this weaponized guilt reveals the exact location of the price you paid. You eliminated every sharp edge. You softened every opinion until it could not cut. You preemptively edited every impulse that might have caused friction, might have created discomfort, might have required someone else to adjust to you instead of you adjusting to them. You became so safe that no one ever had to brace themselves when you walked into a room. And instead of feeling pure, you feel invisible. Not invisible in the way that loneliness makes you invisible. Invisible in the way that erasure does. A specific, quiet horror. You are perfectly present in every room. You are needed. You are praised. But you, the actual you, the one with preferences and refusals and anger and desire and the capacity to say something that might make someone uncomfortable, that person has not been in the room for years, perhaps decades. What you are feeling is the prison of your goodness, and it has no visible bars. There is a line in Aion that explains why. No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. He was not being poetic. He was naming a law of the psyche. The shadow stores everything the persona excludes, every no that was never spoken, every anger that was suppressed, every desire that was deemed too inconvenient to name. These are not pathological impulses. They are the root system of a real self. You were told implicitly and relentlessly that your darkness was the problem, that if you could just be good enough, patient enough, accommodating enough, the reward would come: peace, love, belonging. So you severed the roots. You cut away everything that reached downward into the difficult, the confrontational, the honest. And the tree looked magnificent from the outside, virtuous, noble, generous beyond measure. But a tree with no roots does not grow. It stands still, and eventually it hollows. And what you cut away was not monstrous. That is the part no one prepared you for. The shadow content you severed to maintain the contract was not rage, not cruelty, not the capacity for violence. It was ordinary, mundane, human. It was the restaurant you wanted but never suggested, the opinion you held but softened until it meant nothing, the creative impulse you felt but never pursued because someone else's needs were more urgent, and someone else's needs were always more urgent. It was the friendship you should have ended 3 years ago, but maintained because ending it would require you to tolerate their disappointment. It was the career you wanted but did not choose because choosing it would have meant putting yourself first, and putting yourself first was the one thing the contract explicitly forbade. These are not dark energies. They are the ordinary materials of a self: preference, refusal, desire, friction. The willingness to take up space without immediately apologizing for the space you occupy. You did not lack them. You surrendered them, one by one, over years, in exchange for the one currency your childhood economy accepted. The transactions of a real self require the capacity to disappoint. Not the desire to disappoint, the capacity. The willingness to hold your position when holding it will cost you someone's approval. The ability to say the honest thing when the honest thing will make the room colder. The refusal to apologize for existing at full volume. You eliminated that capacity, not because you wanted to, because the environment punished it out of you so early that you do not remember a time when it was there. And what was left, the person the world called good, was not good. That person was gone. What remained was safe, and safe is not the same thing. You cannot be fully present and entirely harmless at the same time. That is the cost. Not a dramatic tragedy, a quiet theft. The slow, relentless extraction of everything that made you real in exchange for everything that made you tolerable. And the strangest part is that you never made a mistake. You showed up, on time, every time, with exactly what was needed, and you never once created a scene, never once disrupted the equilibrium, never once demanded anything that would require another person to rearrange themselves for you. But you also never participated in reality. You were present the way furniture is present, useful, reliable, positioned exactly where others needed you, and entirely incapable of acting on your own behalf. You watched yourself make decisions that were not decisions at all, but calculations, automatic adjustments to the emotional weather of whoever was closest. And somewhere in the middle of all that calculating, the self that was supposed to be living the life simply stopped showing up. Not with a dramatic exit, with a quiet, imperceptible fade, like a sound that was always there until one day you noticed the silence. And perhaps the cruelest dimension of this disappearance is that nobody noticed. The people closest to you did not register the loss because the version of you that remained continued to function. It continued to show up, to accommodate, to absorb, to generate warmth on demand. The machinery ran perfectly. Only the person inside the machinery knew that it was empty. Only you knew that you were performing a life rather than living one, and you could not tell anyone, because telling them would have required the very capacity for honesty that the contract had already taken from you. To understand why recovering that capacity triggers such violent resistance from the people around you, you must look at what your harmlessness was actually doing for them. You stopped. You stopped accommodating one specific thing that you have accommodated for years. It was not a dramatic confrontation. You simply held your position. You did not yell. You did not attack. You said no, quietly, clearly, once, and the room turned on you as if you had detonated an unspoken agreement. The person who had relied on your absorption called you cold. The family that had depended on your compliance called you selfish. The friend who had never once needed to manage their own emotional regulation in your presence, because you had always done it for them, told someone else that you had changed, and not for the better. This is not a misunderstanding you need to correct. It is not a communication failure. It is the single most predictable dynamic in Jungian psychology. Jung understood that the person who begins to separate from the collective pays for it immediately. The group cannot tolerate the departure because the departure exposes what the group was using the individual to avoid. When one member of a system stops carrying the tension does not vanish, it redistributes. And redistribution is experienced by every remaining member as an act of violence committed by the person who left. That is the clinical reality. The price of becoming an individual, a person with a self that is not assembled from the group's requirements, is that the group will treat your individuation as an attack on its equilibrium. You were the container. You held what they could not sit with. You metabolized the discomfort of the room so that no one else had to develop the capacity to hold it themselves. When you stopped doing that, the group was forced to hold its own shadow, and it could not. So it did what every collective does when confronted with its own unprocessed material. It projected that material onto the nearest available target, you, and noticed the specific words they chose. Not, "I miss you," not, "I am worried about you." They said cold. They said selfish. They said you have changed. Listen to what those words reveal. Cold means you stop generating warmth for them. Selfish means you stop prioritizing their needs over your own. You have changed means you stop being the version of them that required zero maintenance. Every accusation is a confession. They are not describing your character. They are describing the withdrawal of a service. You will feel, in the days after you hold your position, a grief that confuses you. Not the grief of losing the relationship, the grief of seeing for the first time what the relationship actually was. You will replay the years and recognize moments you misread, the gratitude that was actually relief, the love that was actually dependency, the closeness that was actually your labor, invisible and constant, so they never had to learn how to hold their own discomfort. You were not a partner in those moments. You were infrastructure, and infrastructure is only noticed when it stops working. They are not grieving a person, they are grieving a function. The person who calls you selfish for having a boundary did not know you. They knew the service you provided. They knew the version of you that never required anything, never disrupted anything, never asked them to examine a single one of their own patterns. That version was convenient. Convenient is not the same as loved. And the label of villain, the accusation that you have become someone unrecognizable, is not a wound you need to heal. In Jungian terms, it is the projected shadow of a group that has just lost its most reliable container. They are not describing what you have become. They are describing what they can no longer avoid in themselves. The anger they never had to process because you processed it for them. The discomfort they never had to sit with because you absorbed it first. All of it is now loose in the room with no one to catch it. And rather than face it, they named you the source. But there is a strange cold clarity that arrives on the other side of this exile. It is not peace. It is not relief. It is closer to sobriety. You see the dynamics you participated in for what they actually were, stripped of the story you told yourself to make them bearable. You see the ways you traded your reality for someone else's comfort and called it love. You see the moments where you were not being generous, but complicit, not being kind, but absent. And the clarity is not comfortable. It is the opposite of comfortable. But it is the first honest thing you have felt in years. And somewhere in that honesty, in the cold, undecorated recognition of what was actually happening, you feel something you have not felt since before the contract was signed. You feel like yourself, not a better version, not a healed version, not an improved or evolved or more enlightened version. Just yourself, unpolished, unfinished, refusing for the first time to apologize for the rough edges. You thought your harmlessness was your greatest gift to the world. You carried it like a virtue, polished it like a credential, offered it to every room you entered as proof that you were worth the space you occupied. But you were not rewarded for being good. You were rewarded for being gone. Every compliment you received for being easy to deal with was a small payment for your disappearance. And you smiled, and you said thank you. The path to wholeness does not pass through the elimination of friction. It passes through the integration of everything the persona was built to hide. The anger you swallowed, the no you never said, the preference you buried so deep you forgot you had it. These are not your flaws. They are your root system, and without them, nothing grows. You cannot stop being harmless without encountering the parts of yourself you were hiding by being harmless. That is the confrontation, not a choice between being good and being cruel, a confrontation with everything that was taken from you in exchange for approval. And the grief of that recognition does not arrive the way you expect. It is not dramatic. It arrives in ordinary moments. You are washing dishes and you suddenly remember a conversation from 7 years ago where you agreed to something you did not want, and the memory hits you with a precision that takes your breath. You are driving and you recall the exact inflection in your voice when you said, "It is fine," and you hear for the first time what that voice was actually saying. The thousands of small surrenders that accumulated into a life that looks like yours, but was built entirely around the shape of other people's comfort. That grief does not resolve cleanly. It does not wrap itself in a lesson. It sits in your chest like a stone, and it weighs exactly what it should. Because what you are mourning is not a single relationship or a single betrayal. You are mourning the years, the sheer volume of life that was spent maintaining a version of yourself that was never really you. The people who relied on your self-abandonment will call you selfish. Let them. The systems that profited from your compliance will call you difficult. Let them. The guilt mechanism will fire. It will flood your nervous system with the old familiar punishment. And for the first time, you will feel it, you will name it, and you will refuse to obey it. Not because you have become cruel, because you have finally identified the difference between conscience and control. The moment you stop defending your reputation is the moment you start reclaiming your life. If you have ever apologized for something you did not do and felt relief, write this in the comments. The relief was the cage. Jung-based boundary drills, perception training for empaths, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. 236 pages. Downloadable now at thesurrealmind.com.